Hey guys, Miss Warren here. I'm going to talk about some basic clay handling. So clay is what you call it when it's just a lump like this. Ceramics is what you call it when it's a finished piece of artwork. So I'm going to talk about some basic clay handling. So generally what you would need to get started is I recommend a piece of cloth or a paper towel under you, because if you take this wet clay, I know it's pretty gray. After we fire it, it will turn whiter after we bake it. If it gets wet, it's really hard to kind of scrape off the table. See, I'm like moving it around instead of like picking it up. So if the surface is slick, the clay will stick. So I recommend working on an old piece of cloth or a paper towel to kind of get started. So it's very mushy. It comes from the earth. It's kind of like mud. It sticks together. And the more you work with it, the more it's going to dry out. This is pretty plastic. Plastic is what you call it when it's nice and squishy and you can do stuff with it and you can bend it easily. So now as you work with it, it's going to be constantly losing moisture. And after a few minutes of working on a dry surface with dry hands, it might start to get a little bit crumbly. So let's see if we can see it here. You see, oops, sorry, I held it off screen. So this is still pretty plastic. Should have worked with it a little bit longer off screen. But if you notice when you start smushing it, it gets a bunch of, sorry guys, I moved it the wrong way. It gets a bunch of cracks in it. That means it's starting to get dry and crumbly. So if it starts to get kind of dry and crumbly, this isn't too bad yet. If it starts to get really dry and really crumbly, you want to have a little cup of water or something by you. You just dab a little bit of water. If you have a sponge, you can sponge some water on there and kind of work some water into it. Now, if your clay has been sitting in its bag for a while, here, I'm going to leave it over to the side and let it absorb that water some. Because if you start messing with it when it's really wet, you get your hands all muddy and slimy. Now, I'm going to leave that over to the side. If your clay in your bag, if you poke it and it's not at all smushy, what you can do, if it's started to dry out in your bag, you can get a paper towel, get it wet, and wrap your large piece of clay in a wet paper towel overnight or for a couple hours, and it will absorb it. Now, it will absorb it slowly. So wrapping it in a wet paper towel and like squeezing all the air out of your bag will re-moisturize your clay. Now, if you just take your clay and you dump it a whole lot in water and you start working with it and you just put a bunch of water on there, it's going to start to like melt. This stuff is called slip, and it makes pretty good clay glue, like gluing two pieces of clay together, but it's terrible for building anything with. It just kind of dissolves into mud. So this is too much water. And that's why you don't generally dunk your clay into water, because it will just start to dissolve. And then you'll have to like let it dry out again before you can use it. So you want to just get a tiny bit and sponge it onto the surface and kind of leave it off to the side for a second and let it absorb. Otherwise, you'll be a huge muddy mess. And you'll have to let your clay dry out. Now, if your clay is too wet, you can wrap it in a dry paper towel, and a dry paper towel will pull some of the moisture out of it. So this cloth is pretty dry, so I'm going to just leave it on that dry paper towel because the dry cloth, because it was getting a little bit too wet. It's turning into slip, and it's getting all over my hands. Now, just some extra tips. I'll get some until there's some actual molding. This is just like controlling the moisture. So you're going to want to work it back and forth. If it gets too dry, you want to add a little water. If it gets too wet, you want to kind of like let it dry some. And you're going to have to work with the moisture back and forth quite a bit. Now, if you are done for the day, I recommend putting your clay back in the bag with a dry paper towel if it's too wet, or with a wet paper towel if it's too dry. If you're not going to work with it for like 2 or 3 days, I'd put a wet paper towel in there. You're going to put it back in your bag. Now, when it's time to clean up, I just use this cloth so I can just kind of fold it up and use it tomorrow When I'm done with my project, I normally hose the cloth off outside before I put it in the washing machine, because too much clay in pipes, like your washing machine, your sink, your dishwasher, anything like that, can clog the pipes. This stuff is heavy and it tends to sit in the bottom of pipes if you wash it down the sink. So it's going to be important that when you clean up, you rinse everything off. This is too much. What I have on my hand is too much clay to wash down the sink. So I'm going to get a wet paper towel. I'm going to kind of wash my hands into the cup that I was using to moisturize my clay. I'm going to wipe it and I'm going to wash it into this cup. And then I'm going to take this cup when I'm done and I'm going to dump it in the grass outside. The grass will not be hurt by the clay. Clay comes from the earth. It's actually probably kind of good for the ground, but it's really terrible for your pipes. Now, if you don't put a cloth under you and if you don't wipe up really well, your table's going to look ashy. It's going to look powdery. You need to wipe up really well. I suggest baby wipes, but a wet paper towel will do just as well. And then when you're done wiping up with that wet paper towel, you throw it away and you dump your dirty clay water outside in the glass, not down the sink. So that's some basic kind of beginning working with clay, kind of getting the feel of it, adjusting the moisture back and forth. Give it a little bit of try, give it some squishing, kind of play with it, make a few like little snakes or little patties and kind of try sticking stuff together. I'll be making additional videos on how to build things, how to create texture, how to do a pinch pot, how to add two pieces of clay together. But I just wanted y'all to see some basic kind of how adjusting the moisture and cleaning up goes. Now I look forward to seeing your work and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.